Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So if you haven't already turned in your problem set, go ahead and do so now. So I don't have a stapler. Sorry. And then as far as other announcements here, Quiz 12 is going to be due Monday. So I did change that. Okay, so it's due Monday. We should be done with the material for that today, though, I think. Okay, so, but go ahead and you have until Monday. Okay, and then problem set 5, I went ahead and, I know you're just handing in a problem set, but I just posted another one. Okay, this one is pretty short, I think. So it's a fill in the blank type problem set. We'll cover the material for that on Wednesday. So that's the plan anyway, okay? And then we have one more quiz left, and that quiz will be due on Friday, the Friday just before finals, okay? All right, so our riddle today, a party of tears, a liquid trail, I try to sleep, but to no avail. Huh? What's that? No, not a river. Yeah, some of you are saying myself during finals week or right now. No, that's not it either. Okay, let me give you a hint. If you're not asleep, you are awake. So a funeral at one time was called a wake. And behind a boat, there is a wake. Okay, liquid trail, I know, okay. Some of you are saying, I can't wait to no longer see these stupid riddles. I'm sorry, okay? It's just part of your life for the next, just next week, okay? I won't do one during finals on the day of the final, okay? All right, I'll have lots of other questions for you. All right, so we left off right here on Monday. At this point in time, we have covered everything that we need to cover for you to hopefully understand how beta oxidation of a saturated fatty acid, a unsaturated fatty acid, a polyunsaturated fatty acid, and finally an odd chain fatty acid will occur. And there are slight differences in all of them. Of course, you spent quite a bit of time on your group work and also the problem set doing those types of things, okay? So we're going to move now, and we're going to go ahead and skip this. We don't need to do this. This is just how many ATP can be derived from a fatty acid and during oxidation. And we're going to move to then discussion on regulation. Now, in terms of where we're going in the next several days, okay, so we'll talk about regulation. Today we'll talk about ketone body production, and we'll also start introducing fatty acid synthesis. That discussion will carry over into Monday, and then we'll turn our attention, hopefully very early in the class on Monday, to amino acids and amino acid metabolism. That will take us through the rest of the semester, okay? All right, so regulation of beta oxidation is actually straightforward relative to, like, if you were to look at carbohydrate metabolism, okay? We'll consider this really only in the liver, and the key point here would be this. So I'm going to highlight this molecule. It's called malonyl-CoA. That is going to inhibit, okay, so inhibit this, CAT1, okay? Now, some of you say, CAT1, that sounds strangely familiar. CAT1, remember, is one of two CAT, or carnitine acyltransferase enzymes that are found in the carnitine shuttle. So the carnitine shuttle, if you remember, takes the CoA off of an acyl-CoA and puts carnitine on it. That's what CAT1 does. That acylcarnitine moves into the mitochondria, where it's then exposed to the enzymes that we've been talking about for the last couple of days in beta oxidation, and that's where beta oxidation occurs. Okay, the carnitine is removed by CAT2, and it's converted back to an acyl-CoA. That CAT1 is the rate-limiting step of beta oxidation. Okay, if that can't occur, then the acyl group can't get into the mitochondria, and everything that we've talked about in terms of beta oxidation can't occur either. Okay? Right. Now, malonyl-CoA, what is that molecule? Malonyl-CoA is something that we're going to spend some time thinking about over the next couple of days, but malonyl-CoA is made from acetyl-CoA. We all know what acetyl-CoA is, I would hope, at this point in time. All right, the enzyme that makes this is ACC, or acetyl-CoA carboxylase. Okay, acetyl-CoA carboxylase, okay, is one of the key enzymes found in fatty acid synthesis. Malonyl-CoA, the molecule that's made, it's a 3-carbon molecule. Acetyl-CoA is a 2-carbon molecule. This is carboxylating that to this 3-carbon molecule. That malonyl-CoA is one of the precursors to lipid biogenesis. Okay? So if malonyl-CoA levels are increasing because ACC is activated, then that would be an indication that in the cell, lipid metabolism, or the liver cell is preparing to carry out lipid metabolism. That then should feed back and inhibit, of course, the oxidation of lipids. Why make them and at the same time break them down? Okay, so that's this key regulatory point. Okay? Now, ACC, acetyl-CoA carboxylase, is regulated by 2 hormones that we've spent some time thinking about. If blood glucose levels go low, we know that the pancreas will secrete glucagon. Glucagon, we know, activates pKa, and pKa will phosphorylate ACC. Okay, and you see that here, phosphate right here. That will inhibit it. Okay, so ACC will be inactivated. Glucagon is a signal to the liver cell to start to produce glucose, not lipids. Okay. Now on the other side of this, right here, to finish out this slide, high blood glucose means that there's lots of sugar in the blood. Okay, and that means that insulin will be excreted. And insulin will then activate, they call it a phosphatase. There's a specific one, though it has a couple of forms, but it's called PP2A. PP2A, when activated by insulin, will dephosphorylate ACC, and that will activate lipid biogenesis. Okay. And I said that in this class before, that insulin is a signal to the liver to make fats. Okay, and so if you have excess carbohydrates in particular, insulin will be a signal to the liver to start to convert those excess carbohydrates to fat, and we'll look at how that process occurs. Okay? Right. So that honestly is not only the regulation of beta oxidation, but it's also a portion of the regulation of fatty acid synthesis as well. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, now let's go ahead and move on. So I'm going to move somewhat quickly because I got my back kind of against a wall because of that snow day. So I got to move a little bit quickly, and we're going to probably skip some poll everywhere questions. But we're still going to try and get through a lot of this material. Okay, so what I want to do now is talk a little bit about ketone bodies. Ketone bodies play a very important role in fuel sources for a variety of tissues, including the brain, actually, and cardiac tissue, very important as well. But we'll look at what ketone bodies are. But ketone bodies are in the bloodstream at fairly high levels during a fasted state. Okay, during a fasted state, ketone bodies will be anywhere between 2 to 5 micromolar. I'm not micromolar, millimolar. Sorry. Okay, that would be the concentration of ketone bodies in your bloodstream. That would be at what we would call, quote unquote, a healthy level of ketone bodies in the blood. Okay. To compare that to a fed state, during a fed state, ketone bodies are anywhere between 50 to 100 micromolar in concentration, so really low in concentration. Okay, so these are only really produced during a fasted state. Now, a fasted state would be anywhere between 3 to 6 hours after a meal, depending on the size of the meal. Now, the more prolonged the fast is, the higher the concentration of ketone bodies will become in the bloodstream. Okay. Now, these are produced only in the liver. In the liver. However, the liver cannot use them as a fuel source. So the liver makes them and then immediately excretes them. Okay, so the liver can't use them, and we'll look at why that's the case here in a little bit. Okay? Now, during a fasted state, okay, we're coming back to some stuff here. Glucagon will be released during that fasted state, as we've discussed before spring break in our discussion on carbohydrate metabolism and its regulation. Glucagon, we know, has an effect on the liver, but we also said that, and I also said that it will affect adipose tissue. Okay? I skipped a slide at the end of chapter 10 that illustrated how this occurs, but glucagon will activate the breakdown of triacylglycerides in adipose tissue. Okay, so that's what glucagon does. That is, of course, going to lead to fatty acid excretion by adipose tissue, as well as glycerol. Glycerol will be absorbed by the liver and converted to glucose in a fed state. Okay, glucose will then be excreted by the liver into the bloodstream, and that will be used by other sources, including the brain. Okay. The fatty acid that we're talking about that's coming out of these adipose tissues will be bound by albumin, and it can be absorbed by a variety of tissues, including skeletal muscle. Okay. But it can also be absorbed, and this is our main point of interest, it can also be absorbed by the liver. And in the liver, it will be converted to acetyl-CoA, just as we've discussed. And a portion of that acetyl-CoA certainly will be used to make ATP, plus CO2. But a portion of it will be used to make ketone bodies. Okay? And those ketone bodies that can then be excreted, they're used by various tissues, including the brain. Okay. And as I mentioned, skeletal muscle can use them. Cardiac muscle will, though, use them as a preferred fuel source in some instances. Okay. So that's ketone bodies. The importance, one of the main issues here in terms of importance of these, is that when blood glucose levels get low enough, the brain really will use almost exclusively at that point in time ketone bodies for its energy needs. Okay, so it's very important that if blood glucose is going like this, dropping, then ketone body production goes up to maintain energy levels in the brain. Okay? Right, so what we want to do then in the next couple of slides is look at this process. How does acetyl-CoA become ketone bodies in the liver? Okay, again, it happens only in the liver. Right? It's a strange little pathway. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this. It begins where we left off with beta oxidation, right? So this is thiolase. And if you remember, thiolase catalyzed the fourth step in beta oxidation. It catalyzes the cleavage step. Okay, so it breaks off acetyl-CoA. Well, that molecule, in fact, all the enzymes in beta oxidation are reversible. The only irreversible step in that pathway is the CAT1 step that we talked about earlier a couple of slides ago. Okay. So this is reversible, and so thiolase can actually, as the acetyl-CoA concentrations go up, okay, if it's not being used by the citric acid cycle, then this can go in this direction and make what's called acetoacetyl-CoA. Okay. And acetoacetyl-CoA is this 4-carbon molecule. Okay. 2 acetyl-CoAs combined. Now, this next enzyme, HMG-CoA synthase, as the name implies, makes HMG-CoA. Okay? HMG-CoA is beta-hydroxy-methylglutaryl-CoA. Okay? And it uses, somewhat strangely, another acetyl-CoA to do this. And so what you see here then is a 6-carbon molecule, because we've taken 3 acetyl-CoAs and slammed them together to make a 6-carbon molecule. Okay. Now, some of you are sitting there saying, HMG, that sounds vaguely familiar. Isn't that part of, didn't we talk about HMG-CoA as part of the cholesterol synthesis pathway? You got it, okay? In fact, these steps, I said, oh, there's some pathway that makes HMG-CoA. This is the pathway that makes HMG-CoA. We talked about then, we went on to say, oh, HMG-CoA will undergo a reduction reaction. HMG-CoA reductase will make mevalonate. And then that will start the cholesterol synthesis pathway. Okay, we talked about HMG-CoA reductase as a drug target for statin drugs. Okay, the Lipitor and those kind of things. Right? So that gives you some context of where we got HMG-CoA from. Now, in the liver, okay, certainly cholesterol synthesis can occur, but in ketone body production, what will happen is this. Instead of going through the HMG-CoA reductase reaction, it will go through what's called an HMG-CoA lyase reaction. Lyases split things off, okay? So HMG-CoA is going to split off an acetyl-CoA. And that's going to make acetoacetate, and acetoacetate is a ketone body. Okay? Some of you are sitting there saying, so we take two acetyl-CoAs, we slam them together. We take another acetyl-CoA and we slam it onto that, and then we take an acetyl-CoA off. That makes so much sense with this lyase reaction. Why do it that way? And the answer is? Because this is biochemistry, okay? That's the way it happens. That's what we find in the cell, okay? Put three acetyl-CoAs together, take one off, okay? Which HMG-CoA lyase. All right, now, that's a ketone body, acetoacetates, okay? Another ketone body, okay, that you would find is something called beta-hydroxybutyrate, okay? And this enzyme, beta-hydroxybutyrate dehydrogenase, okay, it's at equilibrium, it's totally fully reversible, okay? Holds acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate in equilibrium. Both of these would be called ketone bodies. That's what would be excreted from the liver into your bloodstream. Okay? Now, I will say one thing. I'm going to go ahead and scratch this off. They do have an enzyme. An enzyme can do this. But it doesn't need an enzyme to do this either. Okay, acetoacetate can spontaneously decarboxylate to acetone. Okay, and if levels in your bloodstream get high enough of acetoacetate, you'll actually have a significant amount of acetone in your bloodstream as well. Okay, and that's just a spontaneous decarboxylation reaction. Now, in game starvation, people have a very high level of ketone body production because it's feeding the brain. Okay, in those cases, because they have had such an extended fast, and the ketone body production has gone up so high, concentration of ketone bodies in the bloodstream of those individuals being anywhere between 15 to 30 millimolar, that will be unhealthy, and their breath will actually smell sweet. It'll smell like acetone. Okay, because there's so much acetone in their bloodstream that it's a volatile substance and they're actually breathing it out. Okay, that would be in-game starvation, not a good situation. Untreated diabetes will be the same way. Okay. In fact, we're going to look at untreated diabetes here in a moment. Any questions though on ketone bodies and ketone body production? Yeah.
Ketone bodies keep somebody away from the worst symptoms of hypoglycemia?
So the question is, will these keep them away from the worst symptoms of hypoglycemia like coma and death? So I don't believe so. I would have to look at that. I think that you gain a greater tolerance for hypoglycemia, but you still have to have a certain amount of glucose feeding the brain. Okay, so all of this, like even during this whole process, while certainly ketone bodies production is going up, you're still making a lot of glucose in the liver. In fact, the reason ketone body production goes up is because you're making glucose in the liver.
Because you're breaking it down to the glycerol?
You're breaking down the glycerol, and you're also using acetate. Okay, and then you're slowing citric acid cycle flux. And so you're not using as much acetyl-CoA. And so then this becomes a preferred pathway for it. Okay. Other questions? To piggyback off of that, let's just go ahead and do this. I'm going to skip, like I said, I'm going to skip some questions today because I'm kind of behind here. I want to talk a little bit about untreated diabetes. Okay? So I don't know if you remember this, but I said quite a while ago in diabetes, in an untreated diabetic, one of the symptoms of untreated diabetes is ketoacidosis. Okay? And I said, we'll get to that later on. We'll talk about why that's the case later on. Well, it's later on. So we can go ahead and talk about that now. We've built the framework to go ahead and look at this. So let's look at this. So you are looking at here, let's make sure that we understand what we're looking at. This is a hepatocyte, or the liver cell. Okay? This entire cell. They have lipid droplets in them. Okay, but don't confuse this and these lipid droplets for adipose tissue. So this is a liver cell, okay? And in an untreated diabetic, okay, of course what you're lacking in that setup is insulin signaling, or effective insulin signaling. Okay, let's say it's type 1 diabetes though. In that case, there is just no insulin, okay? And so in that case, because there's no insulin, malonyl-CoA levels will drop, right? So diabetes leads to no insulin. And that means that malonyl-CoA will drop. And you say, malonyl-CoA, I think I've heard that word today. Malonyl-CoA, remember, is what inhibits beta oxidation. And it's the signal that the liver is making lipids. So these levels are dropping because insulin is not activating that ACC molecule, acetyl-CoA carboxylase. Okay? Now, because of that, as a result, then we would say this, that beta oxidation, okay, rate increases, and because of that, then acetyl-CoA levels, concentration in the hepatocyte will go up. Right? Break down fatty acids, make a bunch of acetyl-CoA. Okay? Now at the same time, because there is no insulin, we also know this, gluconeogenesis rate will increase. And you say, gluconeogenesis, that was a long time ago. I don't honestly want to remember anything about gluconeogenesis. Well, too bad. Okay, so gluconeogenesis, remember, is how our liver is going to make glucose, that in the kidney. It will start by taking pyruvate and convert it to oxoacetate. And then oxoacetate will be converted to phosphoenolpyruvate. Okay, so gluconeogenesis will increase in rate, and because of that, then oxoacetate concentrations will go down because it's using oxoacetate. Now that's cataplerotic. The citric acid cycle is now having something taken away from it. And if it's having something taken away from it, then the citric acid cycle rate will decrease. Okay? So if we come over here, we look at all this, right? We've got this over here, fatty acids being broken down into acetyl-CoA. Okay, we've got this going on here. Oxoacetate is being converted to glucose. Glucose is being excreted. Okay, the citric acid cycle then will stop running. This here, acetyl-CoA concentrations then are going to start to rise. What are you going to do with those? You'll make a bunch of ketone bodies out of them. Ketone bodies will be excreted. Okay, acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate. Now we're getting to what we call ketoacidosis. What is that? All right, so in untreated diabetes, no insulin's there will be a fairly large concentration of acetoacetate or beta-hydroxybutyrate. This would be true of also just starvation. Okay, all right, but this acetoacetate, let's look at that. Acetoacetate can undergo that spontaneous decarboxylation and make acetone, like I said. CO2 comes off in that decarboxylation. That CO2 will combine in the bloodstream with water to make carbonic acid, and carbonic acid will break down to HCO3 and a proton. And proton concentrations go up, which means that pH goes down. Ketoacidosis. Okay. Untreated diabetes also, just like in-game starvation, their breath oftentimes will smell sweet. Blood pH is not in a good place. Okay, it's dropping even below 7. And that can be very dangerous. Okay, obviously. So that's what ketoacidosis is. Okay. Awesome. Isn't that awesome? Question, yes, in the back.
So roughly how long would a ketoacidosis have to occur in order for organs to start failing?
That I don't know the answer to. I don't know. Yeah, so the question, if you didn't hear it, was how long would ketoacidosis have to occur for organs to start to fail? I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. Sustained low blood pH would not be good. I don't know how long though. Yeah. Other questions that I can't answer? And there's a lot of those, trust me. Questions that I can't answer. Okay. Well, that's ketone body production. Now, one last thing that I want to say, because here we've talked about how the liver makes ketone bodies, it excretes it, and then tissues use it. Well, how do they use it? So I wanted to go ahead and look at that. Let's go ahead and start this slide here at acetoacetate. Okay, of course, beta-hydroxybutyrate can be converted to acetoacetate very quickly, right? And the key portion of this pathway is this enzyme called beta-ketoacyl-CoA transferase. Okay, which will take coenzyme A off of succinyl-CoA, put it onto this thing, making acetyl-CoA. Okay. The reason I say this is a key step is because that's the enzyme that's missing in the liver. And the liver doesn't have that enzyme, and so the liver can't do this pathway. Once it makes acetoacetate, it can't convert it back to acetoacetyl-CoA. Okay. Once you get to acetyl-CoA, beta oxidation, the cleavage step, catalyzed by thiolase, will take over, split this into acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA will feed the citric acid cycle, and off you go to make energy. Okay. So that's a fairly simple and straightforward little pathway in terms of how ketone bodies can be fed into, of course, energy-producing pathways. And that's it. No more on ketone bodies, okay? Fairly important, as I've said, but now we're ready to go ahead and go to fatty acid synthesis, okay? So I want to get through quite a bit of this today and then have a little bit left over for Monday, but we got to leave quite a bit for amino acid metabolism, okay? But fatty acid synthesis, let me give an introduction to this. Let's first of all start here where. Okay, and the majority of this is going to occur in the liver, in the cytosol in particular. When is this going to occur? This is going to occur in the fed state. It is, as you will see, energetically quite expensive. Okay? How, or I'm sorry, not how, but with, okay? In other words, what are we going to make this out of? This would be excess carbs. That would be the main source of it. Excess amino acids as well. So amino acids can be broken down and used in this pathway as well. Okay. The pathway, roughly, okay, is going to be this. We're going to see this, and what we are going to do in the next several slides is we're going to look at how our bodies can make a 16-carbon saturated fatty acid. Okay, so we will start with 8 acetyl-CoAs. Okay, and those 8 acetyl-CoAs are going to be converted to that 16-0. Okay, an acyl-CoA. It's called palmitate or palmititic acid. That's the type of fatty acid it is. Okay, and this is going to use 7 ATP molecules and it's going to also require significant reductive power. 18 NADPHs, not 18, 14. I wrote down 14 and said 18. Not sure why I said 14 or 18. Okay? Those are all going to be oxidized. So NADP okay, as I mentioned, in NADPH, very important in biogenesis pathways. This is a significant biogenesis pathway. In ADPH, we'll find out where the source of that comes from. Certainly one source of this would be a pentose phosphate pathway, though, okay, that I mentioned during our discussion on oxidative stress in, I guess it was lecture 9, when we were talking about oxidative phosphorylation. Okay. So that's that pathway. Okay, that's as a total what it looks like. Okay. All right, now, I forgot to mention this. You'd have to have 8 coenzyme A's on this. Now, this is going to occur in 3 steps, 3 main steps that we're going to be looking at on these next several slides. The first step that we're going to look at is this, and that's transport acetyl-CoA into the cytosol from the matrix. And some of you say, oh great, another shuttle. You got it. That's good. I mean, you're starting to pick these things up if you're thinking, oh good, another shuttle. That's right, another shuttle. Okay, the next part of this is going to be what we call step 2. This is going to be production of acetyl-CoA. I'm sorry, not acetyl-CoA, malonyl-CoA. Okay, and then finally our last step is going to be catalyzed by this huge enzyme called fatty acid synthase. And that's what we'll talk about on Monday. And it goes by the abbreviation FAS1. There is an FAS2. We'll only talk about FAS1. Now, real quickly, something to say here. These numbers of ATP and NADPH are only taken into account these last 2 steps. There is an additional 8 ATP that have to be spent to get acetyl-CoA into the mitochondria or into the cytosol. Okay. Those are not taken into account right here. So energetically speaking, this is, I mean, as a total, this is going to cost about 15 ATP and 14 NADPH. Quite expensive, energetically speaking. Right? That's why when we look here, the fed state is really the only time that this is going to be occurring. Okay. Now, that's an introduction. Let me real quickly. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. We are going to, as I mentioned, we're going to look at the production of this. So this is a table of different types of fatty acids that you would find in fairly high prevalence in a mammalian system. Palmitidic acid or palmitate is one of the most common fatty acids that you would find in yours and I's body. And the reason is because it's the direct product of what's called fatty acid synthase, the enzyme FAS. Okay? That's what it makes. Okay? Now, that 16 carbon saturated fatty acid can then be moved from the cytosol into the ER where it will be exposed to what are called elongases and desaturases. Elongases will put more carbons on it, so you can go from 16 carbons to 18 carbons, for instance. Desaturases will introduce cis double bonds into it at particular points. Okay, right. So you've got these other ones here, here, Okay, those can all be made within our body in the ER, endoplasmic reticulum, the smooth ER. Okay, through elongases and desaturases, which we won't talk about. Okay, now interestingly, there are these two fatty acids that are called essential fatty acids. You probably have heard of essential amino acids, and maybe even had those explained. The essential amino acids are amino acids that you and I don't have the capacity to make, so we have to then ingest them. Well, there are fatty acids that are the same way. We have to ingest certain fatty acids, omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. These are two of them. Okay? We can't make those. We don't have desaturases that will put double bonds at the 12th carbon of an 18 carbon fatty acid, or the 12th or the 15th carbon. Okay, this is an omega-6. It's called omega-6 fatty acid. This is called an omega-3,6 fatty acid. Okay. Now those are precursors to arachidonic acid. You and I can make arachidonic acid from those essential fatty acids. And arachidonic acids are precursors to prostaglandins. And prostaglandins are really important signaling molecules in our body. Okay? And you may have encountered prostaglandins in some other class, okay? But these are precursors to that. You can also take arachidonic acid or these essential fatty acids, and you can make sphingolipids out of them, and that can become really important in like neuronal tissue. And those would be fatty acids that have like 24 carbons in them. You don't get much beyond 24 carbons. Okay. All right. So that's a crash course in the types of fatty acids that you would find in our body. We're going to look at the production of palmitotic acid and then say, and everything else can happen too. And it's super awesome. We won't get to talk about anything else. All right, now let's go ahead and do this. So go back to this and let's talk about step 1 of this pathway. Transport of acetyl-CoA into the cytosol. Okay, all right, let's do it. All right, where to start? A shuttle system. Okay, this looks complicated, although we have encountered most of the enzymes in this shuttle, and we are familiar with them from other pathways. And this is why you start to do things like fatty acid synthesis at the end of a class like this. Right, but let's go ahead and start this here. Glucose and amino acids. Glucose and amino acids can be broken down through glycolysis to pyruvate. Pyruvate can be moved into the mitochondria, as we know, and can, of course, be converted to acetyl-CoA. So this can go up here, or it can be converted directly to oxaloacetate by the enzyme pyruvate carboxylase. Okay, that's an enzyme, of course, the first step in gluconeogenesis. And both of those are fates of pyruvate that makes it into the mitochondria when insulin signaling is saying make fats. Okay? Now, of course, amino acids, what we might have some exposure to next week, amino acids can also be converted directly to oxaloacetate and also acetyl-CoA. Okay. Now, we've also seen this. Once oxaloacetate is made, it can be combined with acetyl-CoA through citrate synthase. That's the first step of the citric acid cycle. So there's nothing really new there. We have seen all of these pathways and all of these enzymes that will do that, with the exception of how amino acids can become acetyl-CoA or oxaloacetate. Okay? Now here's where it becomes fun. We have not really seen this part, so let's use this cyan color. Okay, so citrate can be carried out into the cytosol. It can be just directly transported out into the cytosol. And when in the cytosol, there's this new enzyme, citrate lyase. And citrate lyase will break acetyl-CoA off of citrate. And then acetyl-CoA will go on to make fatty acids. Okay? Now remember, step 1, that's what this is called, step 1. Step 1 is transferring acetyl-CoA out into the cytosol. Okay, well that's how it's carried. It's carried as citrate, and then citrate lyase produces acetyl-CoA. Now, here's where it becomes expensive. That's an ATP-dependent process, the lyase is. If you want to make, and we do, a 16-carbon fatty acid, you have to move 8 citrates out and break the acetyl-CoAs off of all 8 of them. So this is going to be 8, 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 8, 8. And we'll make 8 oxaloacetate. So it takes 8 ATP to just get the acetyl-CoA out into the mitochondria. Okay? To make 1 lipid. Now we're not, well, bless you, we're not quite done yet. Okay, oxaloacetate is going to be converted to malate. And you say, that sounds familiar. Isn't that like the malate aspartate shuttle? Exactly, that's part of it. Malate dehydrogenase. I told you that was going to be important. Okay, so malate dehydrogenase will convert oxaloacetate to malate. Okay, it'll produce some NAD plus in that. And here is what happens when signals in the liver cell are to make fatty acids. Malate will be, generally speaking, converted to pyruvate, back to pyruvate, which we haven't seen really yet. The enzyme that does that is called malic acid, and it produces NADPH. Okay, now understand our stoichiometry remains the same here. We have 8 oxaloacetate, 8 malates are made, 8 NADH are needed, 8 NAD plus. And then 8 pyruvates will be made by malic enzyme, and 8 NADPH will be made. If you go back 2 slides, it said that there's going to be 14 NADPHs that are needed to make 1 lipid, 16-carbon lipid. 8 of those can be derived just from this malic enzyme in this process right here. Okay. And it's really generating, if you follow what's going on here, the electrons from NADH, okay, are being used to make malate, and then those electrons on malate are being given right back to NADP+, making NADPH. So this is just transferring those electrons from one place to another. Okay? Whew, that's step 1. Isn't that fun? I mean, this is fun. Some of you are sitting there saying, man, now I feel like I'm in metabolism, because he's just spouted off like 17 new enzymes at us. He said he was going to go fast. I did say that. Feels like you're drinking out of a fire hose sometimes in this class. Okay. You get some water, but it's painful in the process. Okay. Questions on step 1? Okay. Like I said, I'm going to skip some questions. Let's go to step 2. Okay. Step 2, let's look here. Step 2 is this. We are going to take, so we looked back here, we got now a bunch of acetyl-CoAs made out into the cytosol. We're in the cytosol, this is where this is going to occur. Acetyl-CoA now. Okay. Going to be combined with bicarbonate to make malonyl-CoA. Okay? And this is going to be catalyzed by this enzyme, ACC. This is the enzyme that I talked about in terms of regulation of beta oxidation, acetyl-CoA carboxylation, or carboxylase. Okay? This is that enzyme, ACC. I'm not going to spend time looking at this other than to say that this is an ATP-dependent process. Okay, you can look at this. Carboxylases, we have now encountered a couple of different carboxylases in this class. Every single one of them, okay, pyruvate carboxylase being an example of one, ACC another one, right? These carboxylases, every single one of them use this enzyme, this coenzyme called biotin. Okay. and they will carry out a reaction very similar to what you're looking at here. Okay, and it's an ATP dependent process. So this up here, we could put ATP converted to ADP plus PI. Okay, the molecule that it makes, malonyl-CoA, is right here. Okay, let's go ahead and highlight this. Malonyl-CoA, 3 carbons. Okay. Carboxylases add a single carbon. Of course, acetyl-CoA is a single carbon. All right, 2 carbons. Okay, and we get the other carbon from bicarbonate. Okay. All right. Now, we looked at over here this. Okay, we said there was 8 of these. 8 acetyl-CoAs are made. 7 of those are going to be converted to malonyl-CoA. Okay. So if you go back to the first slide when I introduced this, I said 7 ATP are going to be used and 14 NADPHs. This is the 7 ATP that I was referring to. It's the production of malonyl-CoA from acetyl-CoA. And you say, what about the 8th one? Wait till Monday. Okay, I'll show you that on Monday. But don't leave yet. I'm not saying you're excused. I'm saying that we'll get there on Monday. Okay, but that's where these 7 ATP are made. ACC is our enzyme. Right? Now, one more slide here. Okay. Come back to this regulation step. Okay, because we can now enrich what we talked about at the very beginning of the class today. So the very beginning of the class today, we talked about how malonyl-CoA will inhibit CAT1. Malonyl-CoA is made by acetyl-CoA carboxylase. Acetyl-CoA carboxylase is this enzyme that we're talking about now. We're now seeing how that's made. Okay. What I mentioned is this. Okay. On that slide, I said glucagon will inhibit acetyl-CoA carboxylase. It will phosphorylate it. Okay. And in its phosphorylation, it inhibits it. Now, what I didn't mention is this. Okay. Acetyl-CoA carboxylase, when phosphorylated, becomes sensitive to feedback inhibition by palmitoyl-CoA. Okay, so it's this kind of slow down process, right? Because glucagon signaling will lead to the phosphorylation of this, right? And as palmitoyl-CoA levels go up in the cell, then that will feed back and inhibit this. Right? This acetyl-CoA carboxylase has I think it's 7 to 8 different phosphorylation sites. And glucagon signaling through pKa can just keep phosphorylating it. The higher, the more sustained glucagon signaling is, the more phosphates this acetyl-CoA carboxylase will get on it, and the more inhibited it will become. Okay. Epinephrine signaling can do this. Something that we should mention as well is AMP kinase can do this as well. Okay, so there are several different kinases that can do this. Okay. AMP kinase, you think to yourself, oh man, that's like long time ago. That seems like February stuff. Exactly. Okay, AMP kinases. If you go back and look at some of our slides way earlier on AMP kinase, one of the things that you'll notice in that is that AMP kinase inhibited fatty acid synthesis. We're getting to that now. Okay. Now, at the same time, okay, insulin activates that PP2A, okay, and that's going to essentially activate this. PP2A will start to take those phosphates off. It will become less and less sensitive to palmitoyl-CoA feedback, and it will become more sensitive to citrate feed-forward activation. Citrate's, of course, coming into the cytosol, okay, at this point in time. And that will activate acetyl-CoA carboxylase, okay? Whew. That's enough for today, man. I'm done. We're done. You're done, okay? All right. Have a good weekend. I will see you on Monday. We'll finish out fatty acids, and we'll start amino acids. Great, thanks.
I also have a couple of questions for you.
What's up?
The first one is in reference to something we were talking about today with the